My name is Mick Blackwell, and I'm 29 years old. I play video games pretty much my entire life. This is me and my brother getting ready to play games something like 20 years ago. We started on Super Nintendo and haven't looked back. I spent thousands of hours in MMOs like RuneScape, WoW, Guild Wars, Warhammer, and pretty much all the other staple MMOs. Thousands of more in competitive FPSs and MOBAs, and then thousands more in platformers, indie games, TCGs, and pretty much anything else you can think of. PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, PC, handhelds, it doesn't matter. I played all the best games, and I still try to play all the best games even today. On the professional side of things, I come from a background in engineering and mathematics with a strong focus in design. My first job out of college, where I worked for several years, was at Epic, not the game studio, but one of the largest healthcare software providers on the planet. What I liked most about Epic was that their mentality with their design and process was to always put the patient first. That approach has led them to great success, and that style of thinking has definitely pushed patient experience forward for all of us. I tell you all this because today I want to cover a few concepts that I think require a certain perspective to communicate correctly. My goal is to discuss the industry challenges gamers are facing, as well as the challenges facing blockchain technology, and then hopefully provide a platform for more meaningful and kind discussion about how both groups can make their respective circumstances better. Our first camp, the gamers, are facing a vast amount of pay-to-win, monetization, and microtransactions alongside high barriers to entry, cost or otherwise. And oftentimes developers only focusing on the very tippy top of the competitive player base when balancing anything. There's also a concept of play to earn, which I think is, for a gamer, honestly kind of silly. What gamer is playing a game to earn? Gamers play games to play games. Now, these problems don't apply to all games, but many, and they are often souring our gameplay experience. In our other camp, blockchain enthusiasts are facing an unfortunate degree of misunderstanding and misplacement of some of the issues related to blockchain. You often hear terms like scams, Ponzi, NFTs, fake. However, there are many people in this group that truly believe in the technology and the root of what makes it so innovative. Removing all the bullshit, really all blockchain does is keep track of transactions sent from person to person. This is no different than if you wired money to your friend via a bank, except for the fact that you didn't have to use a bank. What this ultimately does is allow you to send secured digital currencies, aka cryptocurrencies, to other people without a middleman. This means any person, with or without credit history, with or without a roof over their head, or a credit card, can go online and create a digital wallet for free and then receive a currency that they can use to buy goods and services. That, in and of itself, is a beautiful thing. That brings us to what I want to discuss today, which is the technology inherent to the blockchain and what it could actually do for gaming that other technologies cannot, or at least couldn't, without a pretty drastic shift in mindset and development. First, it's absolutely worth mentioning that the blockchain is not the end-all be-all technology, but it does what it was meant to do very well, and that's keep track of transactions without a middleman. Developers and gamers thus should start to picture the blockchain as another back-end alternative, also known as a database, that is not something centralized like Firebase or Amazon Web Services, which is where most game-relevant information is stored today. Now, on the gaming front, it's been saturated with this mindset of NFTs and other extremely high barrier to entry gameplay mechanics, or else these play-to-earn mechanics that the vast majority of players very much dislike. It's ironic, at least to me, because the whole point of the blockchain at its onset was to remove these types of barriers. Instead, we have these one-of-one super monkeys drawn in paint that are somehow used in a deck building game, and you can't use them unless you spend $1,000 per monkey. That's simply not sustainable, and gamers will never accept it. NFTs themselves are not problematic, as they can do a lot of good for both artists and communities. But trying to force a square peg in a round hole doesn't usually end well. There is a different way, an open source and less greedy approach to utilizing the blockchain that brings benefits to both the gamer and the blockchain. I don't think I'm at all special for saying what I think is obvious, and maybe somebody else has already said it, but nobody does it because it's more lucrative to use the typical NFT type structure and precedent set by these mega game companies with loot boxes and the like. I'm going to walk us through a diagram now which I think shows at a high level at least one way to approach this differently. A way that keeps the barrier to entry low, that keeps game studios funded, and that allows gamers to play good games first and not worry about what's going on behind the scenes. At the top we have a company. Much like any game studio that exists today, this company decides to use the blockchain as one of its backends, one of its databases. It was specifically interested in doing so because deploying a player-to-player exchange system on the blockchain was much easier and more secure than trying to custom code something like a Steam store. They also had this open source vision in their minds of their characters living outside of their games one day, which we will get to in just a minute. Now, moving down the diagram in our second layer, called the blockchain, the primary thing to make note of is that our characters all have their own unique IDs. Margot, a jester-like character, and all Margos thereafter will all have that same ID. So if you collected a Margot, you can trust and verify that you have a genuine Margot. This is different than NFTs in that we aren't calling them Margot 1 and Margot 2. This is more like treating Margot as a currency, where one Margot equals one Margot. So the question is, why does this approach matter at all? Well, let's say we are playing a card game. This card game has some free-to-play cards, no blockchain needed. The rest of the cards are acquired through packs that just so happen to live on the blockchain. You buy a pack, you open it, and you get 5 cards. This isn't all that much different than buying a physical pack of cards from Walmart or packs in other digital card games. Now that you have 5 cards, also known as tokens on the blockchain, and remember, each has its own unique ID, when you log into the card game, all the game has to do is look for those unique IDs that live in your wallet on the blockchain. If the game finds those tokens, those IDs, it can confirm you own one of the cards. Everything stated here so far indeed can be done without the blockchain, which is often the common argument against blockchain technology. It might be harder in some cases and less transparent, but still certainly doable. The one thing that can't be done with existing technology without some extreme shift in development mindset is allowing those characters to live on after the game inevitably dies or is pivoted in a different direction. Let's say Blizzard shuts down and you own 3 Overwatch Winston cards. If you owned those cards on Blizzard servers, they'd be gone for good. That's it. If you owned those cards on the blockchain, you'd still own them. What this means is 2 things. If a company adopted an open source mindset and shared all of their code with all of their users, then all it would take is one developer to spin back up the game and you could instantly start using your Winston cards again. Moreover, what this means is that for intellectual property, which is what prevents you from using Disney's Mickey Mouse in your video game, you can instead adopt a different approach. Let's say this card game has an agreement set that says you may use all art, all assets, all music, and all code, so long as you reference the original IDs of the characters. This then allows a developer fresh out of high school that can't afford nice game assets to utilize others' assets while still benefiting the original project. It also means that these characters can cross game genres and different platforms freely, because all that would be needed is a query or search of the blockchain to find that unique ID we've been discussing. If the user has it, then you can display that character for the user. Here's some examples where that sort of mentality fits really well. Take a minute to skim them. In conclusion, what this does is shift the greed-centric NFT-like mindset away from where it is into a more open source and low barrier to entry platform for gamers and developers to utilize. These users would own their characters forever and always. If more people adopted this sort of standard, then these characters can begin to live outside of their game with no additional cost to the gamer. And that's the key. These companies wouldn't be able to make more money off of us having to repurchase something you already own. You could just reuse it. So, my vision then is that more companies adopt this style of thinking, and then 5 to 10 years from now, you can go online and download the artwork and the code sets from the coolest characters that you can find and utilize those characters in your game for free, allowing all three of the developers, the gamers, and the companies to be a part of something bigger than themselves. If we don't shift our mindsets and do away with this existing way of thinking, the future will only hold more of these microtransaction and play-to-earn frameworks that neither side really needs. I want to thank you for your time. You're welcome to join our Discord or catch a stream. I'd love to continue the discussion there. Thank you. Goodbye.